solution but to step into London to save my life.
There are over 300,000 Tamil refugees throughout the world, including an estimated 120,000 in Sri Lanka itself, 125,000 in India, and 55,000 in Western Europe, including over 2,000 in the United Kingdom. This program tries to tell their story, why they became refugees, what their lives are like today, and what the future holds for them. The problems faced by Tamils in Sri Lanka made international headlines in July 1983.
Communal violence has now spread throughout the country, but the breakdown in Sri Lanka's multiracial society is nowhere more apparent than in its capital of Colombo. Officials admit to 17 factories having been destroyed in arson attacks in recent days. The real figure is probably much higher. The factories are owned by the Tamil minority here. Whole sections of Colombo where they live have been under attack by extremists in the majority Sinhalese community. Many have been beaten, some have been burned alive in the streets. Due to the apparent indifference of the security forces, the Tamils have thrown up their own barricades to protect themselves. Up to 35,000 Tamils have been made homeless by the disturbances. Those who can't find room in the 9 refugee camps in the city are living on the streets under constant fear of further attacks.
Sri Lanka is an island in the Indian Ocean with a population of 15 million people, 3/4 of whom are Sinhalese and 1/5 of whom are Tamils. There are also Muslim and other ethnic minorities. Most Sinhalese are Buddhists. Over 2,000 years ago, their ancestors settled on the island of Lanka. So too did the Tamils, most of whom are Hindus. Traditionally, Tamils have lived in the north and east. During the period of British rule, Tamils moved south in search of jobs. Another community of Tamil speakers was brought from South India by Britain to work on the plantations. Most of these were settled in the central hill country. The colonial government was not above using ethnic divisions to make its task of ruling easier. Tension increased. Sri Lanka became independent in 1948, but kept its close economic links with Britain. Soon after independence, most of the Tamil plantation workers lost their right to vote. The government moved groups of Sinhalese settlers into mainly Tamil areas. In 1956, Sinhala was made the only official language. Tamil leaders organised peaceful protests. The police broke them up by force. There were anti-Tamil riots in 1958. Tension grew, and the armed forces were sent into the north and east. Tamil politicians argued for devolution, but were ignored by successive governments. Finally, in the 1977 election, candidates of the main Tamil political party were voted in on a platform of complete separation. They asked for a Tamil state in the north and east.
None of the Tamil boys are given a place in the medical college, engineering college, universities. Even if they get the highest marks, the disqualification, the one and only disqualification is you are a Tamil. And they are not given. That is how the boys got frustrated.
The new government, headed by J.R. Jayawardena, had pledged to end discrimination against Tamils. Instead, there were repeated pogroms, and in 1981, rampaging soldiers burnt much of the northern town of Jaffna, including the historic library. Meanwhile, some frustrated young Tamils had taken to arms. The government's response was the draconian Prevention of Terrorism Act. Young men were seized, ill-treated, held without trial, and in some cases murdered. This was condemned both by Amnesty International and by the International Commission of Jurists.
Sinhalese government never discloses what is happening. If you are in Sri Lanka and if you are in Jaffna, you know what is happening. Sometimes even the people in Colombo don't know what is happening in Jaffna. Suddenly the army will come in 2, 3, 4 trucks, round up the bus stand. All the young boys waiting for buses or on the bike, everybody will be stopped, put in the truck and taken.
Anger against the government grew, and with it the guerrilla movement. Some cabinet ministers took a stance of open hostility to Tamils. There were attacks on Tamil civilians in the coastal town of Trincomalee and other areas. A carefully organised pogrom against Tamils in southern and central areas began at the end of July 1983. Questions have been asked about the part played by senior members of the government. Gangs of men with lists of Tamil households moved through the capital, Colombo. Homes and businesses owned by Tamils, and in a few cases Muslims, were burnt. The police and army took no action to stop the gangs from committing arson and murder, but cracked down on looters who followed the trail of destruction.
It was very, very crowded. It was burning everywhere, and the whole traffic was blocked. So we just were standing there and saw people running around the cars, and suddenly they came to the car in front of us, and I could see there were about 10-15 people inside, and these people must have been Tamils. So the car were taken aside, and they put petrol, gasoline over the car, and it starts burning. And they also blocked the door so the people couldn't get out.
What did the police and the military do to stop this?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing?
No.
They just looked at it?
Mm-hmm.
Were you personally afraid?
Of course.
In two separate incidents in a maximum security prison, 53 Tamil prisoners were massacred. Some were awaiting trial. They included Dr. Rajes, who had set up an organisation based on Gandhian principles to help plantation workers who had been made homeless. Soon after the pogrom, President Jayawardena made it illegal to campaign peacefully for separation. MPs from the main Tamil party were effectively barred from Parliament. The government which came to power in 1977 had never taken kindly to being opposed, and had taken action against rival parties and the trade union movement.
Sri Lanka Parliament has effectively banned the main Tamil opposition party. Chater and an ITN crew were arrested while filming in Trincomalee. They were held for 19 hours and expelled. This is the first uncensored film report from the Tamil region of Sri Lanka since the violence there began.
The island of Sri Lanka, once renowned for its diversity, has now fallen a victim to it. The wholesale busing of Tamil refugees to their traditional homeland in the north is now underway. Far from solving the problem, it is going to perpetuate it. There are more than 60,000 refugees such as these crammed into camps in and around Colombo. Overcrowded, short of food and medicine, they live in squalor. Their homes and all their possessions have either been burned or looted around them, and the area they're being sent to in the north simply doesn't have the economic resources to cope with such an influx. There are thousands more who have fled to camps throughout the country to escape this sort of violence.
The violence did not end in 1983. Members of the armed forces continued to attack unarmed men, women and children in the northern and eastern provinces. Many villages were wholly or partly destroyed. Thousands of Tamils were killed and tens of thousands made homeless. Many still receive no government help. The fighting intensified. In these extracts from an amateur video shot in Sri Lanka, Tamil villagers in several areas in the north and east tell of their experiences.
இந்த நாட்டிலே பிறந்து இந்த நாட்டிலே வளர்ந்து எங்களுக்கு இந்த நாட்டில் ஒரு உறுதி இல்லை. நாங்கள் எங்கே போயிட்டோம் வாழ்றோம்.
அங்கரத்தில் ஒரு பக்கம் அங்கால ஊர்வாப்படை இதுங்களில் ஒரு பக்கம் வெட்டி கொத்தி எத்தனையோ பேரை கொண்டு போட்டா யாராவது 7 மணி இருக்கு நாங்கள் விளக்கிட்டு குடிக்கிறதுக்கிடையில இங்கே வந்துடுறாங்க. 8 நாள் பிறந்த குழந்தையை கொண்டு வந்தோம். ஒரு புள்ள பிறந்து படாத பாடுபட்டு கஷ்டப்படுறோம். ஆனால் நாங்கள் இனி எங்களை நாட்டுகளை வாவுள்ளதுங்க எங்களை வேலை இந்த தொங்கல் இஞ்சால எங்களை நடுவதாக இருக்கு. போக்குவரத்து பாதை இல்லை. எங்களை வச்சு கிட்ட வேலை செய்யறாங்க. நாங்கள் நினைச்சா எங்களுக்கு பார்க்குற ரீதி அந்த ஊருக்கு போறோம். கூட்டோட அடிச்சுட்டு சந்தோஷப்பட்டு கவலைப்பட்டிருக்க மாட்டோம்.
கேட்கல என்ன சொல்றது எனக்கு சொல்ல மாதிரி இல்லை எங்கட உள்ளையா கொஞ்சம் சிங்கள ஆக்கள் இருந்த ஒரு பக்கத்துல ஒரு பகுதியில நாங்கள் இருந்தாங்க தங்கட ஆக்கள் எல்லாத்தையும் முழுக்க கொண்டு ஒதுக்கி அண்டாசன மதவாசியில விட்டு எங்கட வீடுகளுக்கு ஊர்வாப்படின்னு சொல்லி ஆக்களை போட்டு தான் எங்கட வீடுகளை வந்து காடுகளுக்கு எத்தனை புள்ளிகளை வெட்டி துண்டாக்கி ஒரு இடத்துல ஒரு பிள்ளையை கைட்ட போட்டு இழுத்து கண்ணை தோண்டி ரோட்டா இழுத்து சதையாக்கி இல்லை எத்தனை புள்ளிகளை செய்து போட்டு போயிருக்கு அதனால நாங்க பாக்கல தானே எங்கட
வீடு அந்த ஊர்கால் படம் வந்து சுற்றி வந்தாங்க தோக்கோட வந்தவுடனே மகனை நீ தமிழ் தானடா அப்படின்ட்டு சுட்டு விட்டாங்க நான் பின்னுக்கு தப்பி ஓடி காட்டு கிளம்பி 4 நாள்
நாங்களுக்கு தான் அப்படி பட்னியோட பசியோட ரசிச்சிருக்காம என்ன கடந்து ஆக்களையும் பறி கொடுத்துட்டு வந்து இந்த மாதிரி நிலைமை பஞ்சம் இருக்கிற நிலைமையும் இல்லைங்க ஒரு மாதிரி சத்தம் கேட்டோட உயிரெல்லாம் இந்த கரை இருந்து அந்த கரைக்கு சொல்லி தோத்து விடுங்க எங்களுக்கு நிம்மதியா இருக்கா உள்ள குட்டியா புரிஞ்சா நிம்மதியா இல்லை எங்களுக்கு.
Most of them have died. Some of them have got into small boats and other conveyance and crossed over to India. They went without anything. Some of them while crossing were shot by army.
These disturbing photographs were taken after one of many massacres of Tamils.
We are in different places. My husband has no house now because our house was partly bombed and looted. My elder son is a nervous breakdown. My second son was taken by the army and now I'm told that he's shot dead.
To save my son, I had to sell all my jewelry to go to Colombo and see my son in prison. I have been 7 times. The first 3 times I couldn't see him. Then I got through to Atulak Mudali through Thondaman Congress people. They got me permission with the help of Sellich Army. And since then I have seen him. I have all the proof for all this.
Sri Lanka continues to receive military aid from Israel and from Britain, and the armed forces have received advice from former members of Britain's Special Air Service. Jeremy Corbyn, a Labour MP, has visited Sri Lanka and is helping Tamil refugees in London.
I think the British government panicked during May of this year because earlier in the year the British government had made some curious statements in the House of Commons to the effect that the situation in Sri Lanka was improving and was likely to be returning, in their words, to normal. And in April of this year, Mrs. Thatcher visited Ceylon to open the dam and to have talks with President Jayawardena. And when she returned, she announced the situation in Ceylon was getting better, and she then announced that the flood of Tamil refugees, that was their word, had to be stemmed. And so they first of all imposed restrictions on the members of Parliament's right to take up individual immigration cases and insisted on a reply within 24 hours, and then suddenly imposed visa restrictions, which meant that the problems, so far as the British government was concerned, no longer existed because very few people were allowed to enter Britain from Ceylon. And the visa requirement has remained, the first time it's ever been done for a Commonwealth country anywhere. A number of us have opposed it from the very beginning, and I've just come now from the House of Commons. We've had a debate about this very subject, and once again the government have refused to give a date by which time the visa requirement will be lifted.
The army just says the girls are female suspected terrorists and they take them for questioning, all the young girls, and when they are taken for questioning, the first thing is rape. They rape the girls and they keep them. They are also kept in the camp, female terrorists, supposed to be, but they are innocent girls. And any house they go, they loot, they rape. There was a married lady with one 3-year-old child and expecting 3 months, and she was a polio case, one leg limping. And the army had raped this lady, and she was taken in a very bad condition to the Jaffna hospital, and the article appeared in the papers also, but no action was taken by the government. And mostly the young girls who are raped, they used to scream from the camp at Kurunagar, and the neighbors have heard this, and there was a big complaint. Then soon the government wanted the closest house near the Kurunagar camp to evacuate. They have asked all in 24 hours to leave those houses. There were some vacant houses in Kaidadi area, empty houses by the housing department. These people got into lorries with all their belongings and went and occupied those houses, and the camp had no houses, neighbors close by. And all this raping was heard by the neighboring. Once they went and they had taken a whole lot of people, half dead, half alive. They have been taking them to the biggest Catholic cemetery behind St. Patrick's College near the camp, and they were cremating all these bodies in the Catholic church cemetery. And all the neighbors heard some voices crying, very pathetic voices. That means they were really alive, they were not dead. And in Catholic biggest cemetery, they only bury, but this was cremation by the army by force. And next day the people went and saw anklets, that is the ladies wear some silver anklets. Anklets were gathered from the cemetery, and small bodies of children, 2-3 years, infants. So that means they were not terrorists who were cremated, they were children and ladies as well. So that is why they kept that camp area free. And lot of raping will be done in front of the husband being tied onto the post. But no action can be taken, because at the end of everything, they bombed the house and they said terrorists lived here, we bombed. Government has given them authority. Any house, if you suspect a terrorist is occupying, you can bomb the house. So many houses are bombed, just for the sake of clearing the Jaffna area.
Even for those who have fled to escape this fate, the situation is grim. The British authorities have, in general, been unsympathetic to those who have sought refuge here. It has been suggested that most are in no real danger, and that they are coming for economic reasons.
We are genuine refugees. Otherwise, who will like to leave our own motherland? We always like to be in our own home with our own family. Who will like to leave our houses and come and stay and face a lot of hardships?
The refugees have received support from the Ethnic Minorities Unit of the Greater London Council, the British Refugee Council, UKIAS, and local authorities such as Haringey, Islington and Camden, and some housing associations. They have also been helped by London's Tamil community. The Tamil Refugee Action Group was set up in 1985 with the help of other grassroots level refugee organisations such as the Refugee Forum.
As Tamil Refugee Action Group, we propose to do a few important tasks in this country. One is to cater for the refugees who arrive here. By that mean helping through the immigration problems, as well as DHS, such as red tapes. This is apart from this, we also have a housing association through which we find accommodation for most of these refugees. And the second task of the Tamil Refugee Action Group is to campaign for the welfare of the refugees and their human rights problems.
Tamil Women's League is a group open to all women and campaigns against racism, for the rights of women throughout the world and for justice and human rights in Sri Lanka. It also has provided practical support for refugees arriving in this country. It is not always easy to put the traumas of the past behind and adjust to a new and different life. Tamils in Britain enjoy a cultural freedom they did not have in Sri Lanka. Religion matters deeply to many Tamils. A number are Christian, but the majority are Hindu. Numerous temples and churches in Sri Lanka have been damaged or destroyed by the armed forces. In some cases, Hindu and Christian priests have been arrested or even killed. In Britain, Tamils can worship in safety. Some go to the temple in Wimbledon.
இரவாத இன்ப அன்பு வேண்டி பின் வேண்டுகின்றார் பிறவாமை வேண்டும் மீண்டும் பிறப்பு உண்டேல் உனையென்றும் மறவாமை வேண்டும் இன்னும் வேண்டும் நான் மகிழ்ந்து பாடி அரவாணி ஆடும் போது உன்னடியின் கீழிருக்க என்றார்
For the time being, Tamil refugees have found a place of safety and are trying to adapt to life in an unfamiliar country. Britain has been closely involved with Sri Lanka since the 19th century and still has links. But many British officials have little knowledge of what is happening there and find it hard to sympathise with those who have been displaced.
The British government has consistently claimed that the situation is getting better. There is no evidence whatsoever to support this. In fact, all the evidence points to the contrary. I believe the British government makes this claim because politically they support the government of Sri Lanka. Militarily they support the government of Sri Lanka through the training of Sri Lankan officers and the supply of arms and parts to the government of Sri Lanka, and so it suits them to make this rather extraordinary claim. The Tamil people that have arrived in Britain during the past 2 years, for the most part, have been granted either temporary admission or exceptional leave to remain in Britain, which doesn't give them very many rights in this country. In effect, it keeps them dangling on the end of a string. Very few people have achieved refugee status, and indeed the larger numbers that came in April and May of this year were all given 6 months temporary leave to remain in this country. That temporary leave to remain in Britain is up for review towards the end of 1985, beginning of 1986, and in some cases we're having to argue very hard that the temporary leave should be continued for a further 6 months or renewed at all. I think the British government has acted very badly in this, and indeed the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in April, Mr. Paul Hartling, the Commissioner, made a very strong statement about the attitude of European governments towards refugee status, in which he said that the record of the moralising European governments on refugees was quite appalling when compared to the enormous efforts made by a number of much poorer countries. And he quoted the example of the large number of refugees that India has taken from Ceylon compared to the minuscule number that have been allowed to remain in Western Europe, and Britain is the worst offender in this.
For many, it has been hard to forget.
The most unfortunate, and where's the self-respect of man if we are going to be treated like that? According to the Constitution, and item 11 of the Constitution, no torture can be permitted. And they say that they are out to build a society of self-respect. Where is self-respect when the people are treated like savage?
Government ministers such as Lalit Athalat Mudali are determined to solve the problem by force.
It is most important that we must not appear to be weak in facing terrorist attacks. No country in the world has succeeded by being weak in the face of terrorist attacks. And we know that if the military appear to be weak in the face of terrorist attacks in the northern peninsula, you might cause the kind of backlash elsewhere.
I think at the moment the position is very uncertain. The ceasefire in Ceylon is obviously one that is being breached. The future political arrangements in Ceylon are obviously very much in the balance, and the position of Tamil asylum seekers in this country is likewise in the balance. My position is that those people should be granted some more permanent status in this country and not left in this very curious limbo situation that so many of them are. But I think more importantly is the lifting of the visa requirement and an understanding by Britain and other European countries that the situation in Ceylon is so bad that people are leaving the country to seek refuge and asylum elsewhere. And I believe that the visa requirement that's been introduced by Britain and now apparently by other European countries is a very bad move for that reason.
The Tamils in Sri Lanka are facing genocide by the Sri Lankan government. Every time when the Sri Lankan government wants financial aid, they say they are going for a negotiation with the Tamils for a solution for the Tamil problem in Sri Lanka. What they are really doing, they are sending the armed forces to Tamil area and turning the Tamil homeland into a killing field. They are killing innocent women and children. You can see it in the video. Bombing and shelling going in Sri Lanka. They are running away from murder and torture. Last year, the British government shut the door at refugees. They had to go to Colombo to get a visa, but they can't go to Colombo from north and east. They had to go to India to come over here. When they come here, they end up in detention centers such as Hammersmith and Ashworth. What we are asking the British public to understand the Tamil refugees problem and why they are here, what they are going through, and we are asking the British people to help us, to help the refugees here, and also join the campaign what we are doing for Tamils in Sri Lanka, for their peace and freedom and justice.